Hi everybody. So I'm Mrs. Pecto, and as previously announced, I'm here about summer reading, which the last class was super excited about. For those of you going to the high school, it's pretty much the same kind of thing that you did back in 6th grade before the COVID times, where you read a book, you think about it, and then you do something that shows that you read it and thought about it. So, you know, you're not going to write a book report. You're not going to just say what happened in the book. You want to have something of yourself in it, but you can do all kinds of things, and I'll show you where you can investigate that. You can also make up your own kind of presentation if you want, and there are, in the little packet that you have, the second page is all the information from the public library, and they have a couple of book clubs. They've got one for middle school, one for high school. You can attend either one if you want to just talk about the books, and these books aren't on the list, but it'll count as your summer reading book because it's, you know, through the public library. They'll give you a certificate for showing up. They also have the BIPOC Voices. Any one of these books is fine with that. But you just need to have some sort of evidence that you read the book. So the public library will take care of providing that for me, or you can do it yourself. And then you're going to turn it in the first week of school. It doesn't necessarily have to be the first day, although that way you don't have to worry about it again. You've got the first week, and you're going to bring it to the library and turn it in there. What's your question, hon?
Is this like the ice cream thing that we did when we were young?
Yes, except that you don't get any ice cream. However, thank you for saying that, because the public library does have a book club, and you can, it's Tales and Tales. I think it might be maybe animal thing, and you can read books on your own, and you get points for those, and you can win prizes and get stuff. So if you like to have sort of a carrot like that, then this might be the way. And what you can do is just take a picture of this to turn in as your proof that you were reading over the summer. So if that's something you want to do. Speaking of the public library, I also put all the programs they have for teens, and there's some good stuff. They've got like, they've got henna tattoos, and they've got cooking stuff, and they've got game night, you know, game afternoons, and they've got, there's one thing where they're bringing wild animals to the Beverly Common. I don't know why. It sounds scary to me, but they do. If you don't have a library card for the public library and you want one, I have forms up here, and you don't need to like go in or show your ID or anything. You can just get the card for, and I can deliver it to Ms. Sherman for you. So if you don't have one, get one of these for that. All right, now I'm going to show you how to get to the summer reading website. If you go to BHS Online, which is the high school website, go to About Our School, click on Library, and then blammo, right up there or down here, either one will take you to the same place. And here's the summer reading page. So this is the PowerPoint that I'm going to show you. It's got I'm just going to tell you stories basically about books today for the most part. This one is the process. How does it work? What do you do? And that'll line that up for you. Then projects. This gives you an idea of a bunch of different things that you can do. So you can choose anything here. This is going to be that video that I'm shooting right now. Eventually I'm going to cut it together and make, hopefully, a not terrible video to watch. Then this is the public library website. This is summer stories from last year. You can read anything off of here that you want. The middle school list. Ms. Wozniak has great taste. There's a little bit of slosh over between our lists, but if you want to read from this list, you can read from there as well. And finally, these are student-generated book lists. There's a summer reading advisory council at the high school who helped me choose books, and they also have recommended a bunch of their own. And then there's a national Teens Top 10. There's the nominees for this year. Feel free to read any of those. Frankly, you can read any book that you want that is, you know, at your reading level. Like, you're not going to read Dr. Seuss for summer reading. But if there's anything that you haven't read before that you've been wanting to read, go ahead. I mean, I'm not married to these books. They're great, and I love them, and I'm going to tell you about them. And the public library has these, so they're easy to get. But if you have something else you want to read, that's fine, as long as it's the first time that you're reading it. Don't go telling me you're reading The Lightning Thief, and I know that you read it in 6th grade. All right, are there any questions about the process of summer reading? Okie doke. In that case, I'm just going to start telling you stories. Oh, that is not true. I'm actually going to open up this PowerPoint, and there's two things that I want to say. So these are all the books. These are the covers of all the books. Ms. Wozniak taught me how to make this little image, and I'm forever grateful. It's adorable. So this is what I basically just told you, distilled down. The most important thing is it should be something new to you. Sora and Hoopla are two ways to get ebooks and audiobooks. Sora is through the middle school and high school library, so you just use your Beverly School's email to get in there. You can click on that, use your email to get in, and you can access a bunch of different things. However, if somebody already has it out, then you can reserve it and wait for it to come in. Hoopla is instant gratification. If you click on Hoopla, anything that they have listed there, you get right away, which is really handy because they have a ton of audiobooks. And like, I just read, there's a new Hunger Games book that's like a prequel, and I read it. It was really good. And as soon as I finished it, I was like, I want to read the Hunger Games again. And so I like was able to download the audiobook right away. I've been reading a lot of audiobooks lately, which is a perfectly acceptable way to get your stories. So if you don't want to read a book made out of paper, feel free to listen to a book. That is perfectly fine. And graphic novels as well. You know, there's all kinds of ways to read. All right, so now we have books. I'm just going to tell you stories for the next, whatever it is, 15 minutes, 45 minutes. Okay, so I shall pace myself. The first book in the lineup is The Selection. These two books are both sort of, you know, set in future, alternate world kind of things. Selection follows the story of America, not the country as we know it, but an individual named America. And she lives here. This is the future. What's happened is that society's collapsed and been rebuilt, and now we have a monarchy. There's a king and a queen, and they have a prince. They have a son, Maxim, who's the prince. And it's about time for Maxim to be getting married, his parents think. And so they set up the selection. And what that means is, I think 20 or 30 young women come to the castle and they vie for Maxim's love. Basically, it's a contest. It's like The Bachelor meets the Hunger Games, and these women are all trying to become, you know, the next queen, essentially. So our hero is America, who is she's a number 5. Now what that means is, in this society, it's a caste system, which means that there are different levels of society and different levels of power and rights and things like that based on your parents. So if your parents were manicurists, you're going to be a manicurist. If your parents are musicians, you're going to be a musician. If your parents were teachers, you're going to be a teacher, because that's your caste. Now you can change castes by marrying somebody from a higher caste, but it's rare. Usually people stay within their group. Anyway, America's a 5. 5's kind of just below the middle. So 1s are the king and queen, basically, the royal family. 2s are like, you know, professional athletes, movie stars, millionaires, that kind of thing. 3 are like very well paid, highly educated jobs like lawyer, doctor, that kind of thing. 4s are teachers, librarians, you know, people like that. 5s are artists and musicians and that kind of thing, which I think should be a little higher, but that's just me. 6s are people who work in the service industry, you know, fast food workers, grocery store workers. And then 7s are manual laborers. If you're a farmer, if you're a ditch digger, you're a 7. 8s, they don't talk about. 8s have no rights whatsoever. They can't even work. They just are barely existing. And everybody kind of just hopes that they fade away. America has a boyfriend who is a 6. He's lower than her, but she really loves him and she doesn't care that, you know, she can't, because you can marry up, and her parents don't love the idea, but he is a really good guy. Anyway, she gets chosen for the selection, and if she gets to the finals, her entire family will be made 3s. They'll just be switched up to that level. If she marries the prince, she'll be a 1. She'll, you know, someday be queen, and her whole family. So even though she has no interest in marrying the prince, she decides she's still going to take part because it's going to be good for her family. She wants, you know, her brothers and sisters to have a better life. So she goes, and then she has no intention of winning. She's got this other boyfriend, but then she meets Maxim, and he's actually nice, and he's a good person, and things are not what they seem. So there is a romance piece to the sort of love triangle thing, but there's also like palace intrigue and rebellion. There's a lot going on, and there's a bunch of sequels as well. It's really, I like that book a lot. I loved all these books, so I'm just going to say it was a really good book, like at the end of each one, which is going to sound like it means nothing, but these are like the best of everything that I've read in the past year or two. All right, 6 of Crows. The Beverly High Book Club just read this, and they were all bonkers for it. So it's the story of Kazbrecker, and Kazbrecker is a criminal mastermind. He runs a gambling house, he fences stolen goods, he may or may not have killed a bunch of people, we don't know. All of this, he runs a crime ring in the Barrel, which is like the high crime area of his town, his city. and he's 16 years old. Everybody fears him. He walks with a stick. He has like a little limp, and he walks with this. He always wears black leather gloves. They call him dirty hands. Nobody ever sees his hands because he's always wearing gloves. And when you find out why, it will freak you out. Anyway, so it's a story of Kaz and his crew, and they have this job that is either a kidnapping or a rescue, depending on who you ask. It's either breaking into this fortress or trying to escape from this fortress, depending on your perspective. And it's really, really exciting. Like, this one was a high adrenaline book. Have any of you seen Shadow and Bone on Netflix? It's a new series. It's supposed to be, I loved it, but it's based on this world. It takes place a little bit before Six of Crows, but it's very good. Oh, and if you like the sound of one of the books that I'm talking about, but you want a little more information, after each section, if you go to the PowerPoint online, I have Goodreads reviews there, so you can see it. All right, so these two are about sort of family obligations, basically. With the Fire on High is about Amoni, who is 17. I think she's a senior in high school, and she has a little girl who's 3. So she had a baby in 9th grade, which was not her intention, but you know, these things happen apparently. And she is a really good mom. She's like taking care of her daughter, and she is raising her with the help of her grandma. She lives with her grandma, and her daughter's, you know, really well cared for, you know, clearly is loved. And so Amoni's like going through high school, which is hard enough on her own, but also has this whole other series of responsibilities. Anyway, what she loves more than anything is cooking. She wants to be a chef. And she gets this opportunity to go to study with this very famous chef in Spain, but she is not sure if she should. She doesn't know if she could leave her daughter, you know, for 3 weeks with her grandma. Is that fair? And what about the money? Where's she gonna get the money from? Should that go to her family? So it's all about how she kind of wants to be a good mother, but also kind of have dreams and hopes of her own. All right, The Love and Lives of Rukhsana Ali is about this girl Rukhsana, and when you first started, like when I first started it, it looked like your generic sort of coming out story. You know, Rukhsana meets this girl at school, sparks fly, they start dating, but Rukhsana's parents are super conservative, and she knows if they find out she's gay, they're gonna freak out. Well, spoiler, they find out and they freak out. But this is where it gets, like, it sort of blows up, because her parents are from Bangladesh originally, and they decide this is America's fault, we're going home, we're gonna take her back there. And so they take her to Bangladesh and start setting up her wedding. They arrange a marriage with a man, and she doesn't want to marry anybody. She's 17, much less a man. She's a lesbian. But they're like, nope, this is who you're marrying, this is the wedding dress, try it on, this is where we're having the hall, we've already put down the deposit, and this is happening. So she's freaking out about this. Meanwhile, she finds her grandmother's diary, and when her grandmother was younger than her, probably 14 or 15, she had an arranged marriage with a guy who was really abusive, and it was just awful. And so she's reading this story, she's dealing with her own stuff, but then it's sort of juxtaposed with her parents, who had an arranged marriage, and it worked out beautifully. Like, they love each other, they're a team, and really happy. So it's a bunch of different perspectives on, like, how much do you owe your parents as an adult? So these two are both about taking a trip. Forward Me Back to You is by Mitali Perkins. I love the way she writes. So Forward Me Back to You is about these two kids, and it starts off in the Boston area. Robin he was adopted from India when he was a baby. Like, he never knew his birth parents or anything like that, and he's grown up near Boston. And then Kat lives in California, but she's come to Boston for the summer. There was something happened at her school, and everybody took the side of the other person who was involved, and so she just needs to get away. So she's staying with her mom's friend for the summer, but the church that they go to is having this trip to India to work with victims of human trafficking. And so Kat and Robin are both going on that trip. And what's interesting is there's this whole idea of Americans traveling and, you know, to go on missions trip or helping trips and stuff. And in reality, it's like there's this whole feeling of, oh, let's go help these poor, unfortunate people. But in this case, Robin, they both have an agenda. Robin wants to find out the story of his birth. Basically, he wants to see if he can find his birth parents. And Kat is trying to get over this trauma, and the way she wants to do that, she does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Have any of you heard of this? It's a kind of martial art that was described to me as the art of folding clothing while someone is still wearing it, which I don't know, Cracks me up. Kat is really good at that, and she wants to teach the girls who they're helping, she wants to teach them this because it's a self-defense kind of thing. You use the strength of your opponent against them, and she wants to teach them this to help them heal, when in reality she also could use a little bit of healing herself. Anyway, really good story. And then Darius the Great is another trip. So Darius his mom is from Iran and he lives in Seattle. So he always feels like, people always think of him as, other, like, oh, he's Persian. And he's kind of he gets bullied, he's kind of pudgy, he loves like Star Trek, and his hobby is making tea, like fancy teas. And that's just, even I know how nerdy that is. Anyway, he kind of gets bullied and he's never really had a good friend. Well, his mom's parents live in Iran, and so his grandpa's dying, and so they go to visit the grandpa. He's never met him in real life. They go to visit him before he dies, and it ends up being an awesome trip. Darius meets this kid who's a neighbor, and they become really good friends, and he realizes that he kind of needs to put himself out there a little bit to make friends, but it definitely changes his perspective. He also has depression, like pretty serious depression. He takes meds for it. And his father does as well. And so there's a little bit about how people who have mental illness are the same as people who have physical illness. It's just a different kind of illness, and you need to sort of manage your life around it. It's really, really good. I cried the last 30 pages, not out of sadness. It's not that it's super sad, just because people were actually saying what they felt, and that's, I don't know, something that bothers me when people don't do that. These are both graphic memoirs, so they're true stories about real people. They are memoirs, but written as graphic novels, so there's pictures and dialogue, etc., and they both truly happened. So They Called Us Enemies by George Takei actually appeared in the original Star Trek. Probably the first Asian American television star, that everyone would have recognized. And when he was a little boy, his family was in a Japanese internment camp during World War II. Do you guys know about these camps?
Yeah.
They were concentration camps that the U.S. government built for Japanese Americans. And when before the war, his dad was a successful real estate guy. And by the end of the war, he, had nothing. They ended up being homeless. It was really rough. But George was a little boy. So his perspective is very different than, say, his parents would have been. But a really interesting story. And then Almost American Girl is by Ramin Ha, who's now a full-time cartoonist and graphic novelist. But when she was a kid, she and her mom lived in South Korea, and they came to the U.S. for vacation. But what her mother didn't tell her, she'd been corresponding with this man, and she came to the U.S. to meet him, and she ended up being like, yeah, okay, I'm going to marry this guy. So she told her daughter 2 weeks into the vacation, we're staying. And so she had she didn't speak any English. All of her stuff was still in South Korea. It was a complete surprise that her whole life was being completely overthrown. So at first she's miserable, but she has her drawing to keep her, sort of grounded. And she eventually goes to a better school than the little podunk school she's in, and she has an EL teacher who helps her out. She makes some friends. She learns to speak English. Things work out. But it's just a really interesting perspective on how, quickly her life was sort of pulled out from under her. These two are both also travel-ish. The first one, Heart and the Body in the World, is kind of a gut punch of a book. It's about this girl, Annabelle, who something happens to her. Something really bad happens to her, and you don't know what it is at the beginning of the book. And she clearly has PTSD. One day she goes running and she realizes, I can't go home. I have to keep running. And so she calls her parents and she said, I'm not coming home. I'm just going to keep running. I'm going to run across the country. And her parents are like, what are you talking about? But they know that she's in a lot of pain. So they're like, all right, we're sending your grandpa for you. Well, her grandpa is retired. He has a little RV. So he takes the RV and he's like, okay, I'm your partner now. So he is her home base, and she does it. She just keeps running across the country. Meanwhile, her brother and her friends set up a website sort of showing where she is, and this horrible thing, she only alludes to it at first, and she talks about the taker, and you don't know who the taker is or what the story is, but eventually, by the end of the book, it all comes out and it all makes sense. But as she goes different places, because whatever happened was so awful, it was in the media, people heard about it, and so people start coming out to cheer her on as she's running. And as this happens, it sort of starts to help her heal and makes her, stronger. It's really, really good. Now, We Came, We Saw, We Left. This one is It's one of the top 3 funny books on the list. I can't decide which of the 3 is the funniest, but this is in the top 3. So it's about the Whelan family. They live in New Hampshire. The parents are teachers, and they decide the whole family's going to take a year off and travel around the world. So they do it on the cheap. They're staying in Airbnbs, youth hostels. They're taking buses in the middle of the night, but they see everything. So if you like travel, it's great. But the other piece that's so funny is that the 3 kids are like, well, CJ is the youngest. He's 13 or 14, and do you ever have one of those kids in your class who just has to say everything that comes into their head, and it's usually inappropriate?
That's me.
Oh. Well, it's nice that you're self-aware enough to recognize.
What about me?
So CJ is the kid who he's constantly saying horrifying things in public, but they're very funny. The middle daughter, Sophie, is a princess. You know, she's 16, everything has to be her way. She always has to be perfectly done up. It's like, you know, she's a lot. And then Kat, who's the oldest sister, is kind of a genius. She wants to see all the museums, see all the monuments. She's very focused. So the dad, Charles, is the one who's telling the story. And I don't know if you've ever caught your parents telling stories about you for the amusement of their friends, but I can tell you as a parent, you're really funny. And so it's one of the things that parents love to do. And this is like your friend's funniest dad telling all the stories. So it's adorable. These 2 are actually both middle grade books, but they're a little bit easier reading level, but the topics are so fascinating, and I couldn't put either one of them down. So the first one, Blackbird Girls. Do you guys know about Chernobyl?
Yes.
So it was a nuclear accident that happened in the USSR, which is former Russian, Soviet republics there. And it was a nuclear plant that caught fire and just spewed radiation all across Europe. And the USSR was like, nope, nothing to see here. Nothing's happening. So they did eventually. Everybody found out, but at first they were trying to hide it. So these 2 girls live in Pripyat, which is the next town over from where the site was, and most of the people in the town worked at Chernobyl. Like their dads both worked there, so don't get attached to the dads. Pripyat still exists. It's probably about twice the size of Beverly. They've got like an amusement park and these big apartment buildings, but everything is deserted. So you can go in there as a tourist, but you have to wear a full hazmat suit because the radiation levels are still so high. And this was back in 1986. So it's the story of these 2 girls who basically have to go from Pripyat all the way to the capital of the USSR, which is, they take a bus with their mothers, but the mothers can't get on the train. They have to go on the train by themselves. So it's a survival story of these girls, but under Soviet rule. But it's also the story of Rivka, who is a young girl who's trying to escape from the Nazis during World War II. In the same area. And so you get basically 3 survival stories for the price of 1. It's really, really good. Fighting Words it's rough. It's about this little girl who's 10, Della, and her mom's in prison. She and her older sister are living with the mom's boyfriend, and he tries to attack her, and her older sister, catches it on video before anything happens, but that's enough to get him taken away to jail and then put in foster care. So she knows something bad was about to happen, but she doesn't get like how bad. And her older sister clearly does, because once they're in the foster home, her older sister attempts to kill herself. And so she feels like, okay, now I'm completely alone. But the foster mother is kind of a piece of work. Like you think that she's going to be sort of sweet and caring, like in books, and she's going to make everything better. But she's not. She's tough as nails and she's really sassy, but she does make Della feel safe. And what I love about this book, and I feel like every teacher in America should read this book, because she acts in school, she acts out awful, and you realize as the reader, because you see why she's saying these things and doing these things, like it's because of this horrible stuff that's happened. But her teacher, who's kind of a bad teacher, frankly, doesn't get this and is constantly not being helpful. And so it's just a really interesting, like, how her acting out is actually a way of her showing that she's healing. Anyway, really good book. And the Human Rights Club at the high school is doing a book discussion of this book. So if you're somebody who, doesn't, who the book sounds good, but you don't necessarily want to do a project, you can just go to their book discussion and that will count as your project. So bear that in mind. Let's lighten the mood a little. How many of you like romance novels? Just hands in the air.
I do.
Okay, the rest of you enjoy dying alone. These are, do you guys know who Meghan Markle and Prince Harry are? It's not just middle-aged ladies who are obsessed, but clearly. All right, so Truly Madly Royally, I think was kind of inspired by them. It's about this girl, Zoya, who's an American. She lives in New Jersey, and she's like a community activist, even though she's only a junior in high school. And she sets up this program in her neighborhood so that the elementary school kids can get mentored by high school kids, and it's really successful. And she ends up getting a scholarship to this summer camp, this summer program at a very fancy university, which is clearly Princeton, although they call it something else in the book, I don't know why. Anyway, so she's at this camp thing, and she meets this guy, Owen, and Owen is, when they first meet in the library, they're talking like through a bookcase so they can't see each other, and they really hit it off, and it turns out that he is a prince of a country that is not Britain, but is, you know, British-ish. Anyway, so they start seeing each other, but the Zoya is like, all of a sudden, everybody's obsessed with Owen because, you know, royal family and stuff. And so the paparazzi's like staking out her house, and everybody's like into her business, and she's not sure, even though he's this great guy, does she really want to be involved? Anyway, it's a very sweet story. Opposite of Always is unusual for two reasons as a romance. The first is that it's told from Jake's perspective, and generally romances, at least especially young adult romances, are told from a female perspective. I think it's just like the marketing of it. You know, they figure that young women are more likely to buy these. I don't know. So it's told from the male perspective, but the other piece that makes it strange is that Kate, the girl he's in love with, dies on page 9. It's unusual for one of the lovers to die on page 9. However, excuse me, when she dies, Jake is pulled back to the day that they met. They met on some stairs. And he's pulled back to the day that they met and is allowed to relive their relationship again. And he remembers everything that happened. So it's kind of, if you ever saw Groundhog Day or Palm Springs or any of those, you know, same day over and over things. He's reliving their relationship over and over again. And every time he does, he tries harder to save her life, to try to keep her from dying. So it's kind of like if The Fault in Our Stars had a reset button. That's how I think of it. Okay, so these two are nonfiction. If you like real science, these will be good for you. So Irresistible, have any of you ever started looking at a TikTok and then you look up like an hour later realizing that you have just lost an hour later? So that is by design. That is not your fault. That is the way that the tech companies set up their stuff. They want everything from your phone to your iPad to your computer to the apps that you see on them. They're set up to be addictive so that you keep coming back over and over again. And when I first read this, I was ticked off. I was like, how dare they do this? And a lot of Silicon Valley like designers and stuff don't even let their kids have technology because they know how bad it is for you. However, the book also offers ways of looking at it and ways to help you manage it so that you are in charge of your technology rather than being manipulated by it. Because, you know, it is a necessary in our society for the most part. How many of you assume that you're going to die someday? Die, expire, cease to be. Okay, well, good luck. It's kind of a given. Caitlin Doherty is a mortician, and she writes books about death. And these are letters that she's gotten from kids asking questions about it. So things like, will my cat eat my eyeballs? If I die in my apartment alone and nobody knows and my cat doesn't get fed because I'm dead, will he eat my eyeballs? That is one of the questions. Another one that I liked was, if I swallow a bunch of popcorn kernels right before I die and then I get cremated, will I turn into a giant Jiffy Pop? Like, what will happen?
Ooh, I like that.
And so she answers these questions scientifically. So it's about death, but it's not about like the sad, you know, oh, I'm going to miss all my family, and it's not about the spiritual, what happens to my soul? It's like, what happens to your meat sack when you vacate it? And so from a scientific perspective, it's really, and it's very funny. I keep forgetting how funny that one is. All right, these are the sports books. Dragon Hoops is about basketball, which is my least favorite sport because when I was in 11th grade, I was on the basketball team, and I hold a record that has yet to be unbroken. I scored 2 points all season, and they were for the other team. I made my coach cry in the middle of the game with my incompetence. Needless to say, I left the team, and I've hated basketball ever since. However, Gina and yeah, it was the opposite. There was no one around me. I'm like, oh my God, there's nobody here. And I'm terrible, so I didn't even think it would go in, and it went in and I was like, yeah! And I turn around and half the people are laughing and half the people are just like.
Did you quit right there?
Oh, well, I was not invited to go on the bus on the way home. They're like, can your parents pick you up? I can't look at you.
At least you got 2 points.
Oh, I did. I got 2 points, but they were for the other team. That's mortifying. Anyway, thank you. The applause that I so richly deserved at the time. All right. So, Jinling Yang is a graphic novel writer. He's written a bunch. He's won a bunch of awards. And he started working on this when he was still a math teacher in a high school in Northern California. And the school that he worked at was like basketball crazy. They were having, at like the beginning of the year, he could hear people talking about it. This was going to be the season, they were going to win. And he didn't really know much about it, so he decided he was going to start paying attention. And so he like interviewed players on the team, interviewed coaches, sort of looked into the history of the school's basketball program, the history of basketball in general, and started working on this book. And it ends up just being really fascinating, and it kind of helped me heal a little bit reading about it. Again, it's graphic novel format, so it goes nice and quick, and there's just a lot. I kept Googling things that I didn't know before, like to learn more about basketball, which was shocking, frankly. Things that make white people uncomfortable. This is by Michael Bennett, who he's a football player who mostly played for Seattle for most of his career, but he did play for the Patriots for about 20 minutes. He's retired now, but he has a younger brother, Marcellus, who I think is still playing. Anyway, he has 2 things that he's super passionate about in this book, and one of them is football, and one of them is social justice. So, and it's about half and half. So the football part, I was really surprised at how much I knew I was going to be interested in the social justice part, but the football part, he just made it so interesting. Like, I knew nothing about like the NCAA, the college, whatever, sporting group, and how much work is expected of student athletes as a, sort of lined up with what they're paid, which is nothing, the promise of maybe you'll go pro someday. So that was fascinating to me, and he talks about like being on a professional team and sort of the family feel of that. But then he goes on to talk about like Colin Kaepernick, who's a friend of his, who took a knee and kind of really freaked people out in a lot of different ways. And he has this idea, for some people were like, you're a sports figure, just shut up and play the game. And what Michael Bennett is saying is, no, I work really hard to be in this position, and I've earned the right to talk about what I'm passionate about. And he's really fascinating and also very funny. This is the young adult version. There's a regular version that he wrote first, and then this was edited down for young adults. Basically, they took out some swear words, but you can read either one of them. They're both really good, funny, and thoughtful. Okay, these are the mysteries. The Inheritance Games is about a kid named Avery who is pretty poor, just trying to get through high school. She just wants to get into college and like try to start a life, but her mom has just died, her dad's nowhere in the picture, and she's clearly not in a good place. Then she finds out that this guy, a Texas billionaire, has died and left her his fortune. So she's now a billionaire. However, she has to live in the house that he lived in with his remaining family, who all thought that they were going to be getting the money. And she has to live there for a year to get her inheritance. And the family completely mistrusts her, doesn't know who she is, doesn't know why she got the money. But the thing is, she doesn't either. She has no idea what her connection is. And so the games are trying to find out what that, and you do. It's a lot of people are like, oh, well, her dad's not in the picture, it's gotta be her dad. It is not at all what you think, but it is so gratifying when you find out. And even though you do find out why she got the money, there's still a lot of mystery left to solve. So there is a sequel coming out in September, which I'm very excited about. All right, Truly Devious. This one kicked my butt, not because it was bad, but because it was too good. My problem was thus. So I started reading it. It's a story about Stevie, who gets a scholarship to a very fancy prep school. And the prep school was the site of a murder, a kidnapping back in the 1930s. The guy who started the school, his wife and daughter were kidnapped, and they found the wife's body, but they've never found the little girl. So it's this great, unsolved mystery. And Stevie's been obsessed with it. She's a true crime nut. She's obsessed with this mystery, and she's like, so her application essay was, I want to go and solve this mystery, and this is why I think I can. So she gets a spot, but when she gets there, people start dying. And so mystery piles upon mystery. And you do get, at the end of this book, you do get a reveal. You do get one mystery solved. However, there's still a bunch of other mysteries, and the main mystery doesn't get solved till the third one. But it's really good. Like, what's here is good. But as soon as I read this, and this is one that I read on Hoopla, that free app from the public library, I was listening to it driving around, and this ended, and I was like, what are you saying to me? So I immediately went to Hoopla, downloaded the second one, which was even better than the first one, and like pretty much just drove around Beverly for 4 days listening to it. And then when I finished that one, got the third one immediately. And the third one, like, everything comes into place in the third one beautifully. So just if you don't like to read, you're going to be ticked off because you're going to then have to force yourself to read 2 more books. But it's phenomenal. Okay, these two are both about resistance. White Rose is the story of Sophie Scholl, who was an actual martyr in World War II. She was a young woman who lived in Germany, and she recognized right away what was going on. She was just a kid when Hitler came to power, but she knew that there was something wrong, that there was something off, and he was dangerous and bad. And by the time she got to college, the war was going on, and she and her brother and some other friends put together these pamphlets. There was no internet. Like, you couldn't just say what you thought to a large audience unless you had a large audience. And so what people would do is they would write out their thoughts. And so they wrote these pamphlets about how dangerous Hitler was, the Nazis were, and they distributed them at their college. Well, they got caught, they got arrested, they got convicted, and they got executed. So, spoiler, she dies at the end. But the story is true, and she's now considered a hero in Germany. And it's told from her perspective, so, you know, some of it is imagined, like her internal thoughts. But it's based on, you know, research about her, and it's told in poetry, which I like. It's less text to read, but it gives you a lot more. Internment this is an alternate timeline kind of book. It's based on the second year of the Trump presidency. There was a Muslim travel ban, and Samira Ahmad, the writer, was like, I wonder how far this is going to go. And so she wrote this book. And remember our Japanese internment camps from the George Takei book? She imagined a world where there were Muslim internment camps, where citizens were put in these camps because they were considered dangerous or security risks. And so Layla, the heroine of our story, she and her family are put in a concentration camp in Arizona, I think, and she decides, no, this can't, I can't let this lie, I can't put up with this. So back in the 40s with the Japanese internment camps, there was no video cameras, there was no internet, there was no way to really get the news out. But Layla it's 2018 here, she has an outlet here, and so as dangerous as it is, she's going to resist. And this is a book that I had to read in a Starbucks parking lot all in one sitting because it was so tense. Like, I couldn't stop reading it. I had to know what was happening. So I just will warn you about that. If you're on heart medication, just be careful. All right, these two are the short story books. The first one, Open Mic, it's edited by Matali Perkins, and it's Life Between Cultures. So it's 10 different writers, young adult writers, who talk about the experience of, usually they're first generation, their parents immigrated to the US, so their sort of home life, they have a really deep sort of original country culture there, but then at school and everywhere else, their American culture, whatever, it is in their area of the country. And sort of, sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's awkward, but it's really good stories, and they're short, so you can sit down and read one story, and then you don't have to remember what happened, and you can come back and read another one. So Trust the Grind it's sort of a book of good advice. It's how world-class athletes got to the top. So it's basically, I can't remember if it's 10 or 12 athletes from all different kinds of sports. They're basically giving you advice on how they succeeded and how you can succeed. And when I first read the book, I didn't love it because I was like, okay, you know what? I'm an old woman. I've already lived a lot of time, and I really just want to sit quietly and crochet and watch TV and let my dreams die. But if I was reading this, if I was, going to high school, say, for the first time, there's a lot in here that is valuable stuff that it's taken me 50 years to recognize how valuable, whereas it just comes in a nice little package for you guys. So if you are interested in sports, if you are interested in sort of self-improvement, it's a good pick. And then the last one is A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. I try to choose a classic every year, and this one is by Mark Twain, you've all probably heard of. And it's about this guy, he's an engineer and an inventor, and he is, we never know why or how, but he is thrown back in time to King Arthur's time, the Knights of the Round Table, chivalry and all that. And because he has all of his modern knowledge and all of his modern, ideas and technology, he ends up ruling the place. He ends up, they call him the boss, he's second in command, and sort of everything comes out of that. It is very, very funny. Have any of you seen The Princess Bride?
Yeah.
Okay, so the guy who directed The Princess Bride, his dad, so on Hoopla again, there's an audiobook version of this, which I honestly don't know if I would have read it all the way through if I'd been reading it in an actual book, but he is so funny. His name's Carl Reiner, and he's a comedy writer from the 50s, and before he died, he was an old man when he did it, but it reminds me of The Princess Bride too, like the way the grandpa's telling the story. It is, I had to drive off the road several times listening to this on purpose, just to pull over and laugh because I was laughing so hard. And one of the things that adds to it is, so at the time it was written, it was very modern. This modern guy goes back in time. But now, it was written in 1896, so it's been 120 some odd years. And so their idea of what constitutes, modern science, to us seems terribly old-fashioned, so it adds sort of another layer of comedy on top of that. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend listening to this one, but, you do you. All right, that is the last one. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Yes?
Do you read for a living?
What's that?
Do you read for a living?
Oh man, I love the way that sounds. I mean, I do a lot of other stuff. You know how Ms. Wozniak does, information literacy and organization and blah, blah, blah. We do, but yeah, what it comes down to is I get to read a lot and it's part of my job, which is pretty awesome.
Isn't there's some quote somewhere, it's like, if you really like to read, go into education or jail.
Oh my gosh, I chose wrong. Why don't I ever get caught? All right, anybody else have any questions about summer reading? High school in general, who to avoid, what to do, etc.
Best lunches.
How about to come visit you in the library?
Yes, please do. Hopefully it will be open.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome.